I'm excited to present Ben Deumling. Ben is owner and manager of Zena Forest Products, an Oregon-based multi-generational family business that works to save, restore, and promote the endangered hardwood forests of the Willamette Valley, while also creating sustainably produced products. Thanks for joining us, Ben, and I'm going to turn the presentation powers over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me see. There we go. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. I wanted to start with a brief little overview of what is Zena and what we do and what we're about. We are, first and foremost, it's a sustainable forest. We're also a hardwood sawmill and flooring manufacturer, and our mission is to save, restore, and promote the endangered hardwood forests of the Willamette Valley. We have been taking care of this plot of forest right in the center of the Willamette Valley. You can see the little yellow circle outlining us. We are the largest contiguous block of forest left in the Willamette Valley that's not attached to the Coast Range of the Cascades. The valley, as you can see on this map, has been parceled up and converted away from forest lands over the last 2 centuries. We have been taking care of this forest for a little over 30 years, and it's the place, it's home for me. It's where I grew up. It's ever since I was a little kid, I always knew that this was where I wanted to live for the rest of my life. It's a wonderful little corner of the world, and it has a fantastic ecosystem. It's unlike the Coast Range or the Cascades, are sort of bigger timber producing regions of Oregon. It's a unique Willamette Valley ecosystem. It's drier. It has a lot of Oregon white oak, Douglas fir, big leaf maple, and a bunch of other trees, plants, and animals of all sorts. And this is the family. We're a family business. These are my bosses and my board, and as well as my relatives. And we have been, like I said, taking care of this place for about a little over 30 years. And this is what you see in the picture, the 3rd generation of my family that's living and working here. I feel incredibly lucky to be able to spend my time here. At this is the point where I would probably just go on to the next slide, but I wanted to take a little extra time to point out, as rural landowners, everyone likes to talk about our legacy, how many years we've been here, how many generations we've been here, and that often glosses over the fact that I'm white. I showed up here. This land used to belong to the Native Americans who had lived here for many, many more generations than my family has. And through my privilege, my generational wealth that my ancestors accumulated over time, we were able to purchase this property. There's a long story of sort of how we got there that I won't go into, but it's an interesting exercise to really think about how we got here and what we are doing here and whose land this used to be and who is not owning this property. So it's with a lot of humility these days that me as individually and in my family, we steward this place. It's a large piece of forest that's much more than any one family or person should own, and we try our best to share it as much as possible with the surrounding community. But I think these are important elements to talk about as we think about forest lands and rural lands and ownership and private property and how we got to be where we are today. We practice what I call resilient forestry here in our forest. And forestry by nature is a dynamic process. There's always disturbance elements happening in forest. Trees are growing, they're dying, there's wind storms, there's floods, there's fires, there's beetles, there's all sorts of droughts, all sorts of different things that affect how trees grow. And basic ecology 101 is the more complex the ecosystem is, the more robust and resilient it is to whatever threat is coming its way. If you have a monoculture and there is a particular beetle that infests that patch of forest, it will infest every single tree. Whereas if you have 5 or 6 different dominant tree species on the landscape, you're only losing a 5th or a 6th of the trees on the landscape. So that's basic ecology. That's how we tried to practice forestry here. We trying to have a complex ecosystem that is resilient to change, and that has intensified over the last decade, I'll say, as the climate has started really changing here in our forest. The last 10 years have been significantly hotter and drier than the previous century, and we've seen some very stark changes in our forest. We've lost over 10% of our Douglas fir trees in the forest, primarily due to drought and heat stress. And as a result, the dynamic nature of how we manage this forest has intensified. Things keep changing, and we started experimenting with planting other tree species. First and foremost, we've for many years now focused on some of the lesser known but common tree species that have always grown here: Oregon white oak, western maple. There's a native ponderosa pine that grows here in the valley that almost completely disappeared. And those are all, well, the oak and the pine especially, are much more resilient to changes in the climate than Douglas fir is. Douglas fir is more of a specialist species, and subtle changes in the climate can really affect its growth. In addition to that, we've started looking southwards. We've started for the last 15 years, we've been planting incense cedar, which is native to the drier, rockier hillsides of Southern Oregon, and it's thrived here. More recently, we've experimented with some giant sequoia and coast redwoods from California to sort of see how those might fare in this forest. And it's a complicated game of trying to figure out what wants to grow here 50 years from now or 100 years from now. That's the calculation you're making when you plant a tree. It's not just what's going to be wanting to grow here next year. And we don't know those answers, but we can make some guesses. And all the science points to the fact that the climate is going to warm here, and trees that are currently growing farther south are going to want to move northwards. And so a lot of humility that we try to manage this forest. I realized that humans messing with the world around us, with the natural world, has really gotten us into this problem of runaway climate change, and the idea that we can mess with nature to adapt to that is a little bit lofty, but at the same time, I'm trying to tread carefully and go slowly and gently and see if there's a way that we can help this forest remain a forest and have continuous tree cover that holds water in the soil through the summertime and provides all the benefits that the forest provides for us here in Oregon. And so that's a short primer on sort of how we manage the forest. We are trying to keep multiple species going and keep it robust and resilient. And so whatever threat comes its way, whether it's drought, heat, fire, giant rainstorms that wash everything out, bug infestations, there's still a lot of trees that are going to survive, even if we lose a portion of the trees in the forest. However, this sort of more complex, nuanced, shall I say, model of forestry, while it seems like the right thing to do to me, at the end of the day, we're a commercial forest, and we operate to grow trees and harvest them and sell them to the sawmills. And we do that on a very dynamic sort of rolling basis. We're trying to maintain as much tree cover as possible, so we practice single tree selection for the most part and utilize very small patch cuts to keep the forest as dynamic as possible. But at the end of the day, we manage this for timber to make a living here. However, the traditional sawmills where most people sell their wood don't pay you any more for wood coming from a forest that's managed to better standards than the legal minimum here in Oregon. And that's a conundrum because it's more costly to manage a forest for the future, to manage the forest to be resilient and robust. And to that end, we tried to take things into our own hands and see if we could solve that problem for ourselves at least. And we, over the last 15 years, have developed our own sawmill and millwork operation, where we process a lot of our wood, primarily our hardwoods that grow here in the forest, and turn them into all sorts of value-added wood products. A lot of hardwood flooring, lumber for furniture and cabinet makers, architectural millwork of all sorts. And that has allowed us to find better markets for the wood coming from our forest, because the traditional markets didn't really benefit us. There was no reflection of the different kind of forestry we were doing. And by manufacturing these products ourselves, we can tell the story to our customers of how we work and what we do and why we do what we do. So I wanted to step back a little bit from talking about us in particular and talk about sort of forests in Oregon as a whole. And this is a sort of a grainy map of Western Oregon, satellite image of Western Oregon, but you can see Western Oregon is mostly green, which means mostly trees. There are a lot of trees that grow here. This is one of the most amazing ecosystems in the world. The forests of the Pacific Northwest and Western Oregon in particular have more capacity to hold carbon than almost any other forest in the world. Trees can grow to be 800 years old here, or 1,000 years old. They can grow massive trees here. This is the most productive timber growing area in the whole world. And to that end, we get, as Oregonians, all of the amazing benefits that come from having the most productive timber, most productive forests in the world. And on the economic side, we're the timber capital of the world. We ship logs and lumber all over the globe, and the rest of the globe looks to Oregon, to be perfectly honest, for high quality wood products. And as we think about this amazing resource here, I find it worth thinking about how we as Oregonians, how we relate to our forests. Very many of us recreate out in the forests, down here in the valley, in the Coast Range, in the Cascades, and there are incredible recreation opportunities. As Oregonians, whether we engage with our forests or not, we directly benefit from the air that we breathe, from the water that we drink, from the carbon that is being sequestered, from the biodiversity that is being generated and maintained in these forests. Whether we go out in the woods or not, those are benefits that we all get from living in Western Oregon here. And we also benefit from the wood products that come from these forests. Humans, and especially people living in Oregon, are very heavy users of wood. If you stop to think about it, the amount of wood that every person here in Oregon interacts with on a daily basis is mind-boggling. The average single-family home has about 2.5 log truckloads of wood in that home. The floors that you're walking on are probably wood. The chair that you're sitting in is probably wood. The table that you're sitting at is most likely wood. The list goes on and on and on of the wood products, the paper, the cardboard. All of these products are made from woods and trees that grow right here. And so as we think about how we relate to these forests and how we use them on all different levels, it's important to sort of think about this a little bit and sort of dive in a little bit. I would argue that wood is a phenomenal product to use. From an ecological perspective, it's a renewable resource. If it's managed and taken care of well, it can continue to provide for forever. Wood is one of the primary sequesters of carbon. Forests are one of the primary carbon sinks on the globe, and we happen to live in one of the biggest forest carbon sinks on the globe, right here in the Pacific Northwest. And so using wood products on one level is going to benefit all of these things. In addition, I would argue that a forest is always better than no forest. So even the biggest monoculture out in the Coast Range is still holding more carbon and holding more water in the soil than a farm field or a parking lot. And if we don't use wood, we're going to use steel, or we're going to use concrete or plastic, and all of those are significantly more carbon intensive than wood is. So when you have a choice of a product to use, wood is pretty much always going to be a better choice. That being said, all wood is not created equal. And I think, as we all know, and as I've sort of talked about how we manage our forests, there are many different ways to manage a forest. And it's important to ask, where did your wood come from? What's the story behind that? And ask where that wood came from. Try to find out that story. There's always a story, and it's always an interesting one, but it's one that we don't usually ask. We don't usually think about. And every piece of wood that you interact with in your house, in your daily life, came from a hillside somewhere. It was in somebody's backyard. It may have been right here in the Willamette Valley. It may have been somewhere in the Coast Range. It may have come from the Midwest or Europe or South America or Southeast Asia. We have wood comes from all over the globe. We live in a global economy where it's shipped all over the place. And so it's important to ask, what are the implications of my purchasing choices when I'm just choosing to purchase a piece of wood? And what are the ramifications of that? What is the story from where that wood came from? And this circles back to how we as Oregonians interact with our forests, that whether we want to or not, we're not passive bystanders to the forests around us. And all of us every day play a role in the value judgments of forests. And there's an example here of currently one of the biggest threats to forests, at least in the Willamette Valley and where we are located here, is land conversion. Forests are being converted away from forests at a rapid rate, turned into farm fields, turned into roads and subdivisions and vineyards and all sorts of things that are not forests. And no matter what it's converted to, it is an ecological impoverishment of the landscape to go away from forest. No matter the type of forest, trees are going to be they're going to provide more ecological benefits to all of us Oregonians than anything else that could be on that landscape. And if you think about, why would somebody convert a 50-acre patch of forest to a farm field? Well, that's because they think they can make more money growing grass seed than they can growing trees. And I think that's an indictment of all of us as Oregonians, that we have chosen not to value our forests appropriately. That's an economic decision that shouldn't have to be made. Forests really should be, I would say, put on a pedestal here in Oregon, and not just rhetorically, but actually. And there needs to be a set of value judgments that reflect that. And this sort of comes back to how we have managed our forest, and what we've done with our sawmill operation is try to share those values with our customer base and explain why we do what we do. And amazingly, I've found that there is a large segment of the population that is interested and willing to support good forestry. And we are blessed by all of these people in Oregon that are interested in supporting good forestry and different forestry, resilient forestry. But we still have a crisis in that our forests are being converted, our forests are being managed for dollars only. And most of the industrial forests in Western Oregon they're managed primarily for financial returns. And when you manage a forest for strictly financial returns, you don't get a resilient forest for the future. You get a fairly fragile ecosystem that's susceptible to all sorts of threats coming its way. And so I guess I've made my case fairly strongly that we need to think about the forest around us and think about what we want from those forests, and not just the recreation, but all of the wood products from the forest, and how we can support that. And with that, I think I'm done with my primary presentation, and I finished up a little bit faster than I thought I would. So yeah, I guess I talked a little faster than I had when I practiced. So thank you all very much, and maybe we can have a couple more questions as this presentation goes on.
So again, I'm Chandra Legui, Oregon Wild's Western Oregon Field Coordinator, based in Eugene. And if you didn't catch it before, also a proud owner of an Oregon ash hardwood floor made by Zena Forest. So thanks, Ben. For most of Oregon Wild's history, we have been advocating for the protection and also the restoration of our amazingly resilient forests across the state. And we have some, they're just absolutely stunning and beautiful, as Ben has been talking about, and also super important to so many of the things that the public, all of us, value. Ben talked a bit about that as well. So, we get so much from our forests: clean water, wildlife habitat, healthy soils that produce mushrooms and all of this wonderful vegetation, as well as outstanding recreation opportunities, and at the same time giving us tons of climate benefits. That is, the topic for a completely different, multiple hour webcast. In fact, we did one about forests and climate a few months ago, so you can look that up on Oregon Wild's YouTube site or on our blog. About half of Oregon is on public lands. And so those are lands where public values should be reflecting, or forest management should be reflecting public values. And these are our national forests, lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management, and the places where we do get out and enjoy most of these things. Unfortunately, the vast majority of our public lands have been, and the forest ecosystems on them have been fragmented through clear cutting, through road building over the past century. So through the 1970s, through the early 1990s, really the main purpose of management on these national forest lands was to produce timber. And so we have the negative impacts of producing timber in the way that you're seeing here on the screen. The way that standard forestry is practiced in Oregon, impacting our soil, our water, and on public lands leading to, just a small fraction of our ancient, biodiverse, resilient forests remaining. and leading to the listing of several species that rely on these forest ecosystems, like the northern spotted owl, as well as salmon. A lot changed thanks to the efforts of groups like Oregon Wild in the mid-90s, when the Northwest Forest Plan changed the focus of management of these lands, which I'll come back to in a few minutes. On the other roughly half of Oregon's forested land, we have a different story. Those aren't necessarily managed for public values, though that would be nice. So we're talking about state-owned and private and corporate-owned forest land. So with, the exception of folks like Ben, who are taking care of their forests in a really responsible way, most of, and as he talked about, most of these lands are managed for, a return on investment, producing timber, and as well as a bottom line for the investors or stakeholders in the corporations that own these lands. So, business as usual here is clear cut, replant, and repeat, using herbicides sprayed to reduce other vegetation, usually planting only one type of tree to replace the original biodiverse forest, and doing a lot of damage to wildlife habitat, to streams, to fish habitat, to the soil, and impacting nearby communities in negative ways, like adding chemicals to the mix where people are living and getting their drinking water. So, with this history, which is a little sad to think about, we've also been looking to the future. And as I said, Oregon Wild's been advocating for better practices on our forests for many, many years. So on public lands, what that means is really trying to focus on restoring the forests that had been cut in the past. So those, all those clear cuts that were, fragmenting the Willamette National Forest in that picture that I showed, are now grown into plantations that don't have a lot of biodiversity. And so restoring some of the structures and the natural processes of these forests should be encouraged. And that can mean producing timber volume while doing that, but in a much more conscious way, where the timber is actually a byproduct of the ecological restoration. There should be a lot less logging happening on our public forests. Unfortunately, we're seeing, especially when it comes to climate impacts, unfortunately, we're seeing that go in the opposite direction under the Trump administration, and as well as we're seeing both the Forest Service, but especially the Bureau of Land Management, targeting our oldest forests that have not been logged in the past, and in an effort to meet those new timber targets, and to and under changes from the Northwest Forest Plan that have happened over the last few years that Oregon Wild fought back against pretty hard. But the powers that be, and I'll talk more about that in a minute too, are pushing back just as hard. And we need to ensure that we retain all the protections that we currently have. So no more backsliding with environmental laws and policies on our public lands. We need to protect these last intact forests that we have for all these various benefits that I've been talking about. On private lands, boy, we have a lot of work to do to see more responsible management, more sustainable forest management and production of the timber and the wood products that Ben was talking about. So under the current Oregon Forest Practices Act that governs private lands, massive clear cutting, aerial spraying of pesticides are allowed. There are very few stream buffers. This is a little clip of actual Google Earth footage of the increase in vast impacts of this type of clear-cut logging that's perfectly legal in Oregon, happening on the North Coast and impacting communities that probably many of us on the line have visited and enjoyed. So there's a lot of work to do, and those laws really must be reformed. There has been some positive developments in that realm in just the very recent past. For the last several years, Oregon Wild has teamed up with both communities and other organizations who have concerns about these practices, the way the logging's been happening, and work together towards reform. And just a few short weeks ago, legislation passed in the special session of the Oregon legislature to add some new no spray buffers to streams and near homes, which is a really important step, as well as authorizing a new process to write rules that would protect our water, addressing inadequate stream buffers, logging on steep slopes, the impacts that roads have, and much more. So there's going to be a way for the public to weigh in throughout that process. And again, we have a lot of work to do to ensure that the benefits that come from that and the reforms that we all desperately need to see for our forests come about. So stay tuned for more on that. All those rule changes and modernization of logging laws will have benefits for the climate as well. There's a long way to go, though, towards ensuring that, or towards reforming, things like clear cutting practices and short rotations of our forests that would help benefit the climate. So, embracing climate smart forestry in ways like Ben has for his forest is something that's totally doable on these over a large scale. We can let the forest grow longer between harvests to store more carbon and to provide more wildlife habitat for longer, leave more trees standing, protect streams instead of logging right across them like is allowed in so many places today. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think that the public is starting to think about these things a lot more. Outside of policy and legal reform, there are other ways that we can all be involved in supporting more sustainable forestry. And one of those is simply by, Ben talked about how we use so many wood products, but we could use less. We could think harder about, the houses that we're building and their size or new construction. We can use wood products that last longer, that might mean less clear cutting or less of a demand for that type of practice. And of course, we can support folks like Ben and Peter Hayes, who's pictured in this picture here, who runs another sustainable forest, who are doing their best to be responsible to the land. We can seek those people out, learn that story about where our wood comes from, seek out Forest Stewardship Council certified products, which are definitely go above and beyond the bare minimum as we typically see practiced, even though there are still more things that certification could provide. And right now we're seeing a lot of opportunities for new policies that would elevate forests as climate solutions. So in things like at the national level, ideas around the Green New Deal and how forests could be incorporated into sort of a climate action at the national level. Governor Brown has issued an executive order that directs agencies, including the Oregon Department of Forestry, that owns and manages a lot of these timber producing lands, to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So how can we incorporate forests in that? Those are sort of policies that Oregon Wild's advocating for and that the public can also have a part in. So, here in Green, Oregon, where we pride ourselves on protecting our environment, our beaches, our forests, et cetera, it might seem like these are common sense things that our legislators might be working towards, but unfortunately it's not that easy. There's been a lot of pushback to any type of reform of these laws or even acknowledging that there is a different way of doing business on our forests. We're up against a powerful lobby industry by the timber industry that is looking to maximize that bottom line. There's a lot of misleading information that comes from the industry, in particular out of the Oregon Forest Resources Institute. You see all those commercials touting how great Oregon's laws are protecting our water, replanting forests. when, while glossing over the many impacts and the fact that that our laws really do lag behind most other states in the West. We have, elected officials and a Trump administration actively working against upholding environmental laws, denying climate science, and looking to up the cut on our public land. So it's an uphill battle. And perhaps the biggest one is against just big corporate budgets, as Ben talked about a little bit, that bottom line, and that's one of the reasons that these forests are managed this way. There's a great piece of reporting, if folks out there have missed it, that came out last month from the Oregonian and OPB that really highlights the fact that these big corporations have been making small rural communities pay the price for their sort of cut and run mentality. I highly recommend checking it out. The link is up here on this graphic now. It's projects.oregonlive.com /timber. So check that out to see what we're up against and also for some thoughts on how we could do better. So there's tons of information. I guess maybe the biggest other big thing we can do is just learn more. So Oregon Wild's website has a lot of this information, as well as forestwaters.org, where you can learn more about efforts to reform the Oregon's logging practices. Shameless plug here in my book, Oregon's Ancient Forests. There's a lot of great background information about forest management on public lands, especially, and on the importance of these forest ecosystems. And we also have a lot of great information on our website and in this pamphlet that's pictured here called Forest Defense is Climate Defense, that offers more background on what we can do to manage our forests better for our climate. So with that, and apologize again for the technical difficulties, I think we can move to more questions. So thank you.
Great. Thanks for that, Chandra. And we've gotten a bunch of questions in, and hopefully the technical difficulties don't put us too much over time to get through a bunch of them. And some I'm going to mash together. Ben, you'll like this. A lot of people are asking, what products are you making? Where can they get them?
Absolutely. You can go to zenaforest.com and learn everything you want to know about what we make, and a little bit about why we do what we do. We make a lot of hardwood flooring. That's one of the things that our Oregon white oak in particular is incredibly good for. We also work with Oregon ash. Chandra has an Oregon ash floor of ours, and Western bigleaf maple. So those are the three species we work with. And in addition to flooring, we do, if it's wood and it goes in your house, we probably make it. We build stair treads and baseboard trim, and we provide lumber for kitchen cabinets and dining room tables and coffee tables and bar tops and benches, and we do a lot of wall paneling, all sorts of things that go inside a house. So that's in a nutshell what we make.
How do you manage public access? Do you work with the Department of Forestry? And do people come visit your operation?
Yes. So historically, it's been word of mouth, and basically, primarily we have a very active hunting program, and so we for decades, many people sign up through a very formal system that we have, and come and hunt out here. And that's we probably have 100 people who sign up on our list each year for hunting access. And in addition to that, it's pretty informal word of mouth. We really try to share this forest as much as we can with everybody. So go to my website, send us an email. There's lots of opportunities for hiking and recreating out here. It's being a small private forest surrounded by a lot of neighbors. There's a lot of challenges to unrestricted public access, so we're very much not unrestricted. It's all with permission only, and we're actively logging most of the year. We are headed into our high fire danger season, and pretty soon we will completely close up the forest, almost completely, to reduce our fire risk. And during hunting season, it's not so good to go hiking because there's hunters out there. So there's a lot of complexities to managing public access, but we try to share it with as many people as possible. We as a family have been thinking a lot recently about how do we increase access to this forest, especially to folks who traditionally wouldn't necessarily have an easy time accessing outdoor recreation opportunities. And that's an ongoing conversation that we're having, and I'm looking forward to finding new ways to open up this forest in a welcoming but also practical and responsible sort of way. So it's an ongoing process.
Speaking of fire season, how does Zena manage in terms of prescribed burning? Do you do any prescribed burning? How do you manage around fire risk?
Yeah, we don't do any prescribed burning. Historically, the Willamette Valley was burned for centuries, for millennia, by the Native Americans, and it was what the Europeans, when they showed up here, what they inherited, what they took over, was a very fire adapted ecosystem. So fire was a very natural part of this ecosystem. That being said, we're in the middle of the Willamette Valley, surrounded by lots of farms and neighbors, and prescribed fire is complicated, and we have chosen not to pursue prescribed fire on our property. We manage with a combination of careful, forest management and a good bit of mowing with a tractor in certain areas. We have some areas where we have these meadows and savannas that we try to maintain as sort of natural ecosystems, where we don't really do any logging in those areas, and we mow quite a bit. Fire is a big risk. In the summer, late summer, the risk gets really high, and we've had some neighbors who've done prescribed burns through Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I've observed, and the results are really cool. The ability to do it is monumental. It takes a lot of work, and for us, it hasn't quite seemed like it's worth it. So we've tried to find other ways to achieve the same goals.
Do you have any thoughts about how to, a lot of your presentation was about how can we value forests for all of their values, not just the return on investment. Do you have any thoughts on, and I'm smashing together a bunch of questions here, on what kind of policy mechanisms we could use to, as Oregonians, uplift forests to where they should be, so that they're, not only someplace where we're getting forest products, but we're also paying for or valuing the clean water, the carbon storage, the wildlife habitat, all those other values. Are there some mechanisms that you think that can kind of get us there?
I have some ideas, and the first one is my mother Sarah coined this term, and I am copying her. We should change our Oregon Department of Forestry to the Department of Forests. Forestry is sort of, we think of as the growing and managing of trees to make 2x4s. The value of our forests are much more than the 2x4s we can get from our forests. They're as Chandra said, they're a byproduct sometimes of more important work. They're one of the things we get from our forests. So changing the structure of our Department of Forestry to think of these lands as forests, I think would go a long way just in sort of changing mindsets. putting a price on carbon and finding a fair and science-based way to reflect that to landowners, I think is critical. There are some challenges in getting everybody to agree on accurate carbon accounting in forests and forestry, but that is essential. We need to get to a place where we are accurately acknowledging the carbon that is being sequestered and the carbon that is being lost due to different forest practices. And that, I think, is probably the biggest thing we need to work on. And there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for the state to play a role in helping landowners think through carbon smart forestry and finding financial incentives for that. I also think we need to come up with some, whether it's rules or again financial incentives to not convert forest lands away from forest lands. Currently, there are no rules in Oregon that prohibit you from converting your forest to another use. And again, I don't know if it's a rule or if it's an incentive, but one way or another, I really think we should, as Oregonians, we need to realize that we are losing our forests. We continue to lose forest cover every year in Oregon, and when those are the most valuable ecosystems we have, we need to find a way to stop that and to incentivize people to not have to do that, because most people like forests and they wouldn't convert them if they didn't have to.
There are a couple questions about Zena and your takes on herbicide spraying, like when you use it, when is it appropriate, when is it not appropriate. There's a couple questions on that.
So we do use herbicides, and for many years were a completely herbicide-free forest, but we are very close to Salem. There's big urban area there. We have every single invasive species in Western Oregon in our forest in large numbers, not just blackberries, but Scotch broom and ivy and reed canary grass and false brome and shiny geranium and vinca and they're all here. And they make a lot of challenges to growing trees when you have all these invasive species that are, some of them, aggressively invasive. And so we use herbicides in a very targeted, judicious manner. For instance, when we have holly that isn't an invasive in the woods, we will cut the tree down and spray herbicide on the stump. That kills the stump, kills the root. It doesn't really hurt anything around it. It's a very targeted way to use herbicides. So we use it in a very limited and very targeted way. I feel like if you're not dealing with invasive species, herbicides don't really have much of a role. And even with invasive species is a head scratcher for us, as we're trying to figure out how do we live in a ecosystem for the future. And some of these species are here, and we're not going to eradicate them. We will manage them and trying to find innovative ways to live with them and live around them and work around them. And herbicides are one small tool in a large toolbox. But I think we have gone way overboard with our use of herbicides, and aerial herbicide applications don't seem like the right fit for the forests of Western Oregon. We definitely don't do that, and wouldn't want to see that on our forest.
Okay, I'm going to mash up two questions for Chandra. One being, there was a question about what was the climate report. Can you talk a little bit about the climate report? And I'll break this up, and I'll give you this one after you talk about forest defense as climate defense.
Great. Yeah. A couple of years ago, Oregon Wild produced the pamphlet called Forest Defense is Climate Defense. So, when it's safe to do so, you can come into one of our offices and get it, or find us at a community event. But also it's on our website as a PDF. If you go to OregonWild.org and look for forests, and actually I should probably just look to see what the actually we'll make sure it goes in the email that you get as a follow-up to this. But it lays out, the importance, sort of the basic science, the importance of forests in battling climate change, as carbon sequesterers and storers, and why they're important with that issue. But then what we can do both on public lands and private lands to better store carbon, or change practices to be, more to be more resilient to climate change, and address some of those issues. So it's that's what forest defense is. Climate defense is.
And the second question asks you to look a little bit into your political crystal ball, but in the event that there is a change in presidential administration on the federal level, or the presidential administration would be changing, what types of reinstatement, like, is it too late, and is there enough momentum behind pushing back on some of these environmental rollbacks to regain some of the protections we want for federal forests?
Yeah, that's a great question, and always exciting to look into the political crystal ball. I guess I have a couple thoughts. One is that it's never too late to reverse some of the bad decisions that a president makes, or that his administration may be making. That said, it can take a while to go back through a process of taking public comment or reversing regulation. So it kind of depends on how the rollbacks happen, whether it's legislative through Congress or through administrative rule or an executive order. But often they can be reversed. My other main thought, though, is that the new administration actually has to have the will and interest in doing that. And if we have a lot of things on people's minds in this country that are really important, that a new administration is going to be taking on, that Congress is going to be taking on, and is our environmental laws and forest management going to be a part of that? We need to make sure that it is, up there on the list of priorities for a new administration to, be looking to manage public lands more responsibly, to battle the climate crisis, as well as, the against the ecosystem collapses that are happening. So it's up to the public to demand that those changes are made in a new administration.
Okay, and one last question for Ben, as we're starting to go over time, and there's a lag between when we're talking and when they're seeing things. So how have you tried to use your forests and your experience to educate other people, whether they're in government or they're other forestry owners? How has that worked in terms of sharing what you've learned and building a community that is trying to value forests in this different way than we see other private forest owners working their lands?
Yeah, we're lucky in that we're close to Salem, and we used to, before COVID, we had regularly had tours out here. Tours for the general public, we've had tours for lawmakers, we've had forestry tours for forestry professionals, university, Oregon State School of Forestry comes up here fairly often, high school classes, middle school, grade school classes, community college classes. So we've, up until COVID, have regularly had tours of anybody who wanted to come out here, came out here. And it's been really neat to meet all sorts of people from all over the place who have come out here to see what we do and talk about forestry. And sometimes we, it's a presentation, we share that what we do to them, and sometimes it's more of a conversation and everybody learns a lot. And since COVID, it's gone a little bit more online, but we hope to continue to share this forest, not just for recreation, but as a learning laboratory with all of Oregon, and have been very lucky in that regard so far.
All right, thanks, Ben. And we had a lot more questions and a few that were like giant pieces of block text, so I'm sorry I didn't get to those, but we hope this was educational for everybody. And this will be available tomorrow as a video that we will post on our website, and we'll email out some more resources to everybody who signed up. Thanks everybody for attending, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.